Imagine being so hungry that you walk into a luxury restaurant just to escape the cold. And by mistake, you sit at the wrong table, a table meant for powerful executives and millionaires. Everyone is dressed in expensive suits, except one poor girl in a worn coat, silently praying no one notices she doesn't belong. The room goes quiet. People start staring. A manager begins walking toward her, ready to ask her to leave. But then the CEO at the table raises his hand and says just two words: "Let her stay." No one understands why he stopped them. Not the managers, not the guests, and certainly not the girl who hasn't eaten in 2 days. But what happens next will change her life forever, because that one moment of kindness will lead to something none of them ever expected. Stay with this story, because by the end, you'll see how sitting at the wrong table became the moment that changed everything.
The girl knew the moment she sat down that the table was not meant for her. The white tablecloth was too clean, the silverware too polished, the crystal glass shining like something from a world she had only seen through restaurant windows. Yet her legs were trembling so badly that standing again felt impossible. So she stayed there, quietly folding her worn hands in her lap, praying no one would notice the mistake she had just made. That night, the restaurant glowed with soft golden lights and quiet conversations. Expensive suits and elegant dresses filled the room. The air smelled of fresh bread, roasted herbs, and wealth. To everyone else, it was just another dinner at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. But to the girl, it felt like she had stepped into another universe. Her name was Lena, and she had not eaten a proper meal in 2 days. She had entered the building only to escape the cold evening wind that swept through the streets outside. The glass doors had been opened for guests arriving for a corporate dinner, and in a moment of hesitation and desperation, she slipped inside. No one stopped her. Everyone assumed she belonged. If this story about kindness and unexpected moments touches your heart, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Kindness Stories. Stories like this remind us that a single act of compassion can change a life forever. Lena had never meant to sit down. She had only wanted to warm her hands near the lobby heater and leave quietly. But the restaurant was crowded, and waiters hurried past carrying trays of food. In the confusion, she wandered farther than she should have. Then she saw an empty chair at a long table near the center of the room. Exhaustion clouded her judgment, and before she could rethink it, she lowered herself into the seat. She kept her eyes down. Her coat was thin and faded. The sleeves were slightly too short, revealing wrists reddened by cold air. Her shoes were scuffed, the soles worn unevenly from months of walking everywhere because buses cost money she didn't have. Around her, executives laughed and discussed numbers, contracts, and future plans. None of them noticed the quiet girl sitting among them. At least, not yet. Lena tried to make herself invisible. Her stomach twisted painfully as plates of steaming food were placed in front of the guests. The smell alone made her dizzy. She clasped her hands tightly so they wouldn't shake. Across the table sat a man who had built the company hosting the dinner. His name was Daniel Carter. Daniel was not just another executive. He was the CEO, the founder, and the reason the entire room was filled with people hoping to impress him. He had spent years building his company from a small idea into a powerful corporation that employed thousands. Most people saw him as confident, sharp, and unstoppable. But Daniel had learned long ago that success did not erase the memory of hunger. As conversations flowed around him, something unusual caught his attention, a silence that did not match the confident energy of the others. His eyes slowly moved across the table until they landed on Lena. She looked completely out of place. Her posture was tense, her gaze fixed on the table, and though she tried to hide it, Daniel noticed the small tremble in her hands. He studied her quietly. Years of leadership had taught him to read people. Most employees in the room were eager to talk, eager to impress. But this girl carried something else. Fear. Not the fear of a mistake at work, the deeper fear of being discovered where you were never supposed to be. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair, observing. One of the managers beside him suddenly frowned as he noticed Lena as well. The man leaned toward Daniel and whispered something under his breath, clearly confused about why a young girl dressed like that was sitting at their reserved table. The manager began to rise, preparing to ask her to leave, but before he could stand fully, Daniel quietly lifted a hand. The movement was small, but it carried authority that everyone at the table understood immediately. The manager froze. Daniel's gaze remained on Lena for another moment before he spoke calmly. "Let her stay." The words were simple, yet they changed everything. The manager hesitated, clearly unsure, but Daniel had already returned his attention to the dinner as if nothing unusual had happened. Across the table, Lena had heard the words. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain others could hear it. She didn't look up. She didn't speak. She simply remained there, unsure whether this was kindness or the calm before embarrassment. A waiter approached with another tray of food. Without hesitation, he placed a plate in front of Lena like he did for everyone else. The dish was warm roasted chicken with vegetables and fresh bread. The smell nearly made her cry. For several seconds, she simply stared at it. She could not remember the last time someone had served her food like this. The voices around her blurred into distant noise. Carefully, almost nervously, she picked up the fork. Her hands trembled. The first bite felt unreal. Warm, real food. Not leftovers from a trash bin behind a bakery. Not the stale crackers she sometimes bought with spare coins. Real food. Across the table, Daniel pretended to listen to a conversation about quarterly growth projections, but his attention drifted back to Lena again and again. He watched the way she ate, slowly at first, carefully, as if someone might take the plate away. It was a way of eating he recognized, because once, many years ago, he had eaten the same way. The executives continued their discussions, unaware that something quiet but powerful was unfolding at their own table. Lena finished half the plate before realizing tears had begun sliding down her cheeks. She quickly wiped them away, hoping no one noticed. But Daniel noticed, and something in his chest tightened. Because suddenly, sitting across from that quiet girl, he remembered a night from his own childhood when he had sat in a crowded diner with empty pockets, praying someone would ignore the fact that he could not afford the meal. That night had changed his life, and somehow he sensed this night might change hers.
As the dinner continued, Lena felt trapped between gratitude and fear. Every bite of food brought warmth back into her body, yet every passing minute increased the chance that someone would realize she didn't belong there. She tried to eat slowly, carefully, blending into the room the way a shadow blends into darkness. But her presence had not gone completely unnoticed. A few executives glanced at her from time to time, confusion flickering across their faces. Some assumed she must be a young intern. Others thought perhaps she was a relative of someone important. None of them dared question the situation openly, because Daniel Carter had already made one thing clear. She was allowed to stay. Daniel watched the room with quiet awareness. He noticed the glances, the curiosity, the unspoken questions floating between his colleagues. But he also noticed something else. Lena had not touched the breadbasket again, even though it sat directly beside her. Not because she wasn't hungry, but because she didn't want to seem greedy. That detail told him more about her life than any conversation could.
After a while, Daniel gently pushed the bread basket toward the center of the table. It stopped right beside Lena. She hesitated. Then, after a moment, she took one piece. Not two, just one. Daniel felt a strange mixture of sadness and admiration. Some people revealed their character in moments of comfort. Others revealed it in moments of hunger. And this girl had clearly learned dignity long before she had ever known security. The dinner slowly moved toward dessert. Conversations shifted from business strategies to casual stories and laughter. Lena listened quietly. For the first time in months, she felt warm. But warmth also made something else return: hope. And hope could be dangerous when your life had taught you to expect disappointment. Finally, Daniel spoke, not loudly, but clearly enough for Lena to hear. He asked her name. The room grew slightly quieter. Lena's heart raced again. Slowly, she lifted her eyes for the first time since sitting down. Daniel's expression was calm, not judgmental, not suspicious, just curious. She told him her name, Lena. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. He asked where she worked. The question froze her completely, because she didn't work anywhere, not anymore. Her last job had been cleaning tables at a small cafe that closed 3 months earlier. Since then, she had searched everywhere. Restaurants, shops, offices. Everywhere said the same thing: "We're not hiring." Or worse, they simply ignored her. Silence stretched across the table. Daniel seemed to understand immediately. He didn't press further. Instead, he asked a different question, one that surprised everyone. What would you do if you had an opportunity? The executives looked confused, but Lena answered honestly. She said she would work harder than anyone, because when you've lost everything, even a small chance feels like the entire world opening again. Daniel studied her face. Not the clothes, not the nervous posture, but the determination hiding beneath exhaustion. And suddenly he saw something familiar. The same stubborn resilience he once carried when he had nothing but a dream and a borrowed desk in a tiny office. The dinner ended soon after. Guests stood, shaking hands and preparing to leave. Lena quietly prepared to slip away unnoticed. She never expected to see Daniel again after that night. But as she reached the restaurant entrance, a voice called her name. She turned. Daniel stood there. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he said something that would change her life forever. He asked if she would come to his office the next morning. Not for charity, for an interview. Because sometimes the greatest talent doesn't arrive through perfect resumes or polished introductions. Sometimes it walks through the door, simply looking for warmth.
That night, Lena barely slept. She lay awake in the small shelter bed she had been using for the past 2 weeks, staring at the ceiling while the memory of the evening replayed again and again in her mind. Part of her feared it had all been a misunderstanding. Maybe the CEO had only been polite. Maybe he had forgotten already. Maybe the interview wasn't real. Morning arrived far too quickly. Lena washed her face in the shelter restroom and carefully brushed her hair. Her clothes were still the same worn coat and simple dress, but she cleaned them as best she could. Then she walked across the city. Every step felt heavier with doubt. The company building was taller than anything she had ever entered before. Glass walls reflected the bright morning sun. Employees walked through the entrance carrying laptops and coffee cups, moving with the confident energy of people who belonged there. Lena hesitated outside the doors. For a moment, she almost turned back. But then she remembered Daniel's words, "Come tomorrow." So she stepped inside.
The receptionist looked up with mild surprise, but asked politely how she could help. When Lena mentioned Daniel Carter's name, the woman's expression changed. After a quick phone call, she nodded and asked Lena to wait. Minutes later, an assistant arrived and guided her through a hallway lined with offices and meeting rooms. Finally, they stopped at a large office with windows overlooking the entire city. Daniel Carter stood beside the desk. He greeted her with the same calm expression she remembered from the restaurant. The interview was simple. He didn't ask about degrees or previous companies. Instead, he asked about challenges. He asked about responsibility. He asked about moments when she refused to give up. And Lena answered honestly, because when your life has already fallen apart, honesty becomes easier than pretending. An hour later, Daniel leaned back in his chair. He had already made his decision long before the interview ended. He offered Lena a job, not a charity position, a real one, an entry-level role in the company where she could learn, work, and grow. Lena stared at him in disbelief. For several seconds she could not speak. Tears slowly filled her eyes again, but this time they were not tears of hunger, they were tears of possibility. Years passed, and Lena never forgot the night she sat at the wrong table. She worked harder than anyone in the company. She arrived early. She stayed late. She studied every process and learned every skill she could. Managers noticed. Promotions followed. Slowly, the girl who once entered the restaurant just to escape the cold became one of the most respected employees in the organization. But the most powerful moment came nearly 10 years later. Another corporate dinner was held at the same restaurant. The room was just as elegant, the tables just as bright, and at the center of the room sat Lena, now a successful executive herself. During the dinner, she noticed something near the entrance, a young boy standing uncertainly just inside the doorway. His clothes were worn, his posture nervous. He looked exactly the way she once had. For a moment, the room around her faded, because life had just given her the same choice Daniel Carter once had. Lena stood. She walked across the room and gently guided the boy to an empty seat at her table. When a confused manager approached, she simply smiled and said the same words that had once changed her life. Let him stay. Before the story ends, we have a small request. Please comment, "Kindness changes lives," if you believe even one small act of compassion can transform someone's future. Because sometimes the most important opportunities in life don't come from perfect timing or perfect plans. They come from someone choosing kindness in a moment when it would have been easier to look away. And if this story touched your heart, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel Kindness Stories. Your support helps us continue sharing powerful stories that remind the world how much a single act of kindness can truly matter.